Welcome to our second episode of Oh God, It Hurts!
Oh God, it hurts!
Oh God, it hurts! Sorry. I'm your co-host. My name is Eddie, aka GameAgent ET.
Whoop.
Yeah. And this is...
JJJ, aka the Six Button Samurai, aka Maurice.
Maurice. Where'd you get that from? Is that a new name?
Oh man.
Oh man. Oh yes, the memories.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Shout out to Maurice, wherever you are.
Maurice
was a guy that got way too excited about Skeleton Warriors on the Saturn.
And yeah. And his
catchphrase. About it at the store and just go, oh man. And it's a great thing that we think about to bring us joy. So shout out Maurice.
Yep. We love you, Maurice.
Last week's big question was if there was one thing that you used to have in your gaming collection that you could get back, what would it be? And you and I each had two things.
Yep.
You had the Donkey Kong tabletop.
Kind of. It was a Q*bert tabletop.
I thought it was the Donkey Kong one was the one you were fixated on.
Actually, I had the Donkey Kong tabletop too, but my favorite was Q*bert. And that was from Parker Brothers. Okay. Not Coleco.
Ah.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, literally, I would take any of the ones I had. I also had Frogger. My sister had Miss Pac-Man. Yeah. And my brother had Zaxxon.
Nice.
So I would have taken any of those.
Good news on that front.
Yeah.
The Q*bert one is actually cheaper.
Oh, yeah?
Than the DK tabletop. There are loose ones on eBay.
Yeah.
That range between like $40 to $80.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
No. And then there's like a mint boxed one that's like $175.
I would consider getting one.
You would, because that's your jam.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So oddly enough, that is like hands down the most affordable of the things that we talked about.
So
I looked into my first I was going to say I looked into my first choice of Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Yeah.
Complete copy of that now will run you anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500.
Oh my god. Yeah, I didn't realize it was that much. I thought it'd be like a couple $100.
I mean, it's got such an absurdly low print run.
Yeah.
And the notoriety of that game has just grown and grown and grown in the 20 plus years since it dropped.
Yeah.
Your other choice, which was Ninja 5.0 on the Game Boy Advance,
yes,
is also a pretty expensive beast. Like cartridge alone, assuming this is like a legitimate cartridge and not a bootleg.
Yeah.
Around $700.
Jesus.
Complete in the box.
Yeah.
More like $2,000.
That is crazy. Now, I would definitely go back in time and pick that up. Probably that'd be my highest priority. And I wouldn't sell it either. I would actually keep it. That's how sick I am. Because
I think now looking at this, like between Panzer Dragoon Saga and the other one I had was the Garo Mark of the Wolves home cart. Yeah. That one ranges between like $1,300 and $2,000.
Wow.
Depending on state of completeness and condition.
Yeah.
So,
it's crazy, man. It's crazy how these old games that we used to enjoy are now just so much in value. And
well, no, the collectible games market has just done insane things.
Yeah.
I think partially it's fueled by the fact that like there's so much new technology available to play these things in different ways.
Yeah.
You've got like the FPGA based analog systems, other repro consoles, and there's just an entire ecosystem now that sort of fuels it sort of actively fuels the nostalgia that people have. And they're just like, oh, like that one game like really means a lot to me and I want to try and get like a legit copy of it now that I'm like
Yeah.
older and make better money, this, that, and the other. So
Well,
yeah, it's
but
pretty wild.
it is, and then it also kind of pushes people into, going towards the dark side and, hey, if I can play
Oh, a
this
little emulation.
somehow. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing though. Like, right. I mean, I personally don't have any issues with that whatsoever, especially
Oh,
since
me neither.
the majority of these things are not things that these companies are actively trying to sell anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, all three of those games, well, Garou specifically, like, there is a modern version of that you can buy on consoles that is still available today, and it's ridiculously cheap.
Yeah.
So, if you want like a nice, fully featured one that easily looks great on your television, this, that, and the other, maybe has some network play in tow, that's definitely an easy way to do that.
Definitely.
Of course, Neo Geo specifically just sort of operates in its own kind of insane, high-priced orbit.
Ever
And,
since the beginning, I would think.
well, it has for a long time. I mean, obviously, the console and the games themselves started out, the
Pretty
console was like
expensive.
$700 when it dropped with 2 sticks and a game.
Yeah.
The games themselves range like $200 to $250. And then it's funny because the system sort of disappeared from like mainstream consciousness when the Saturn and the PlayStation landed. But after that is when the Neo Geo actually got a lot of its best games. And like the few that continued to collect for that thing wound up amassing like just a really pretty penny's worth of stuff now.
Yeah.
All of those later releases for the console are just ridiculously expensive. So,
Well, and I know that you're well versed in Neo Geo circles because you were part of the Neo Geo forum, right? The one that was like a
I
fan.
spent a fair amount of time on the NeoGeo.com forums,
Yeah.
which, for better or worse, was
yeah, and I remember. I mean, I was a little bit of a part of it. I wasn't as prominent as you, but
yeah.
I was on the forums, and we did talk about it a lot back in the day. And
Well, I
followed
managed to learn a lot from that community because
yeah,
I owned a Neo really early on. It's funny. I went on a trip to LA shortly after I graduated high school,
yeah,
and I loaned this friend of mine like a bunch of money to pick up his first super gun.
yeah.
And that was the thing that Dave and I were playing his Street Fighter II Champ Edition JAMA kit on. And I was waiting for my money for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden one day he was like, hey man, I don't think I'm actually going to be able to drum up that kind of cash. Like, do you want this Neo Geo system? And I was like, okay. And so, like, it's funny because I have an initial memory of getting that system, and all I had for it for a long time was Sengoku. And, like,
yeah,
I still hate the sound of that game and the title screen of it because
it wasn't the
when
best.
you only have one game like that for a console like that,
yeah,
you're gonna continue and beat it and play the shit out of it and then get really sick of it.
yeah.
And that was pretty much where I landed with that game until I was lucky enough to get a copy of Baseball Stars 2 on clearance from the then Software, etc.
Yeah.
And so that was like a fantastic score, and that sort of kept me over until like Samurai Showdown dropped.
It didn't help that the games are so expensive. Like even for me when I was a kid, I had
it was weird because like this good friend of mine had literally plunked down $1,800 for a Street Fighter II Champ Ed board.
Yeah.
And so by contrast with that, the Neo Geo was not that expensive, but at the same time, it's like, my devotion to fighting games in that era really wound up sort of. There's a lot of really good games for Sega Genesis and Super NES that I wound up not spending time with because I was so focused on the fighting games in that time. But that's a conversation for another podcast.
Yeah, actually, that is because I have my weird little things that I kind of did not pick up back in the day. That do I regret it? Maybe a little, but I'm in the same boat when I kind of skipped a few genres because I was too into certain things.
Yep.
So I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
But
Well, it happens, and it's it's also a testimony to how deep some of those games were at the time. The fact that you could play a single fighting game like that for months, and now we know years on end with some people. I mean,
yeah,
those games are really, really deep, and you can spend as much time as you want with them, basically.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we're going to get now into the water cooler segment. And Street Fighter V had a really big content update this week.
Yeah, it definitely
why don't you
did.
tell us a little bit about that, Ed?
Well, the 2 previously announced characters got more information, and those 2 characters are Oro, who originated from the Street Fighter 3 series, and he is the infamous. He used to be a character that only fought with one arm, but now he has both arms, but he's holding a turtle in one of those arms, so he's still basically fighting you with almost one arm the whole time.
Yeah.
And then there is Akira, who is a character from a series Rival Schools that kind of had a cult following, very popular back in the PlayStation and Dreamcast days. And she is kind of like I don't know too much about her backstory, but she has a biker helmet that looks really cool, and she seems to have some of her attacks from the Rival School games where she launches you up and does an air combo. And I forget the style she has of fighting, Baikwan. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's a Chinese martial arts style. And it looks really nice. Both characters look very diverse and very interesting to play.
Right.
So I'm really excited for those characters. I definitely want to try them out when they drop. I believe August 16th is the date. Yeah. So how about you? Are you feeling
well,
this
and then
update?
the other big shoe from that announcement.
Oh yeah. I forgot about this.
So, and I think you and I disagree on this slightly, but it's going to be interesting to take apart. They announced the very last DLC character for Street Fighter V.
Yeah.
And that's this very sort of earnest MMA style, kind of a boxer, kind of a kick fighter sort of guy.
Yeah, with tattoos.
His name is Luke. And this sort of generated a stir. And you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, first of all, there's a little bit of a thing with people. They notice that Street Fighter V has a lot of blonde characters in it. And this is yet another one.
Yeah.
And number 2, a lot of people have been saying their things online about this character, saying that, well, I don't know about the look of this guy. It kind of looks like they threw like a bunch of things in a bag, a bunch of traits of popular characters in a bag, like Nash's hair, and then like the trunks from maybe Adon or Sagat, and then the tattoos from name your tattooed character in any fighting game. And just in general, you have this guy who doesn't really look all that awe-inspiring, to be honest, in terms of character design, but the fighting style looks interesting too.
Yeah, that's the thing. The fighting style with him, it almost seemed more Street Fighter, quote unquote, than a lot of the SF5 roster in particular. I mean, he almost sort of seemed somewhere between like kind of a guile and a DJ thing happening, the way his projectile works into like a series of punches.
Yeah.
Like he seemed like very much like horizontally oriented. Like it's really about like sort of playing the range game horizontally against other characters.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know. Like I'm intrigued by that. I also think it's sort of interesting that most people are feeling like this character is going to be more of a focus in Street Fighter 6, and
yeah.
this is essentially, it's almost a way of like testing out a character design ahead of a new game dropping, which is a pretty interesting tactical decision.
Yeah. It's kind of like a teaser, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like a playable teaser in a game that comes out before the game. So
Right.
to put that on him is kind of interesting because
Mhm.
now it piques a lot of people's interests. And
Right.
also just the fact that, I mean, we already saw this in Street Fighter 3 when Alex dropped. And this wasn't like how it worked right now, where they're dropping a character before the game comes out. But when
Mhm.
Alex came out in Street Fighter 3, Capcom wanted him to be the main focus of that series. But
Right.
then it kind of shifted back to Ken and Ryu, which back in Street Fighter 3, those were the only two returning characters from
Right.
Street
Well, you
Fighter
were
2.
telling me a story about an infamous location test of that game.
Yeah. And
And
I saw it on, I read it on Polygon, the website polygon.com. And there was a lot of kind of like weird reactions to this game. Like, that, all I see is Ken and Ryu and all these weird characters. And a lot of people were kind of, some were confused, some were just downright, this isn't the Street Fighter that I know. And then it had its own host of gameplay problems because it was slow. It wasn't really, from what the Polygon article said, from what I understand, the person that was in charge of the Street Fighter 3 project in the beginning, he wasn't really much of a fighting game player. So that's why it didn't feel like a fighting game, to be honest.
Well, that's a pretty weird thing to be in charge of, then.
Yeah, because I played Street Fighter 3 when it came out, and it did not feel very good, to be honest.
Right.
It just felt like, there's moves you can hit with them, but there wasn't really much of a flow.
Right.
And it just felt kind of disjointed at times. So that game,
well, that was a really confused time for the franchise too, because like SF2 had gone through 5 iterations, and it landed at the iteration that people still play to this day.
Yeah.
Having gone all the way up to Super Turbo, people still worship that game.
Yeah.
And then they had also developed the Alpha series, the second of which was largely seen by the player base as like, oh, like this is kind of the rebirth that I've been waiting for. Yeah. You know what I mean? And a lot of people picked up that game and really dug on it in a huge way.
Yeah.
And then 3 comes out the following year.
Yeah.
And it was just like, all right. Like,
yeah.
I remember the first time I played it, and I was like, I was blown away by it visually, just the sheer quality of the animation.
Yep.
But everything else about it just felt off.
Yeah.
It felt weird. It felt sluggish.
It was more of a, hey, look at what we can do in terms of graphics and things like that. But then they didn't really focus too much on the fighting part. So that's why it was what it was at that time. And luckily, they rectified that in the second game of that series, Giant Impact.
Right, Second Impact.
Or Second Impact, I'm sorry.
Giant Attack.
Giant Attack. Yeah, sorry, I got mixed up.
No, it's all good. And it's shocking, like how fast that came out
Mm-hmm.
after 3. Like there was a very short amount of time between those games.
I think if it was DLC, yeah, it would have been like, hey, sorry we messed up. 6 months later, here you go. This is what we really wanted to bring out.
Would have been a patch.
Yeah, it would have been that, and probably would have been Street Fighter 3 still, but better.
Right.
Yeah. But
So yeah, it's really interesting, I think, to look at this new character in Street Fighter V and sort of
yeah,
look at it through that historical lens and see how, sometimes they've tried things. Street Fighter V has had sort of a long and kind of weirdly rocky road. I mean, it didn't come out of the gate in a way that most people expected.
Yeah. But that's what makes Street Fighter just a beautiful series. It's because they try so many things. They're not afraid to try and fail because they know, hey, if it didn't work, then we'll just keep working on it and then try to polish it up so that it's a much better game than when it started. Because I think if you saw what happened with Street Fighter V, that happened as well in terms of when that game came out. It was kind of like a bare bones type of fighting game where it was, hey, there's no single player experience, but hey, you can play online. And hey, esports, you like esports, right? You can connect online and play with other people around the world. And then there was also the issue with the online experience where it wasn't great. I mean, I don't know if it's great now because I haven't played in a long time online, but when I first played that online, oh my god, it was like 2-3 minutes just to even like get into a match. And that's quite a long time. Maybe even more because of the load times and just in general finding anyone. And then once you played, the connection half the time was good, half the time was bad. And I live here in Japan, and even the connections were spotty at times, and it was like against another Japanese player. So yeah, I mean, they did a lot to kind of make it a better experience, as you can see with the recent summer update. And now there's a lot of more diverse characters that make this game a lot more interesting to play, because I think one of the complaints early on for Street Fighter V was the characters, they all kind of feel slightly the same, and just there's no real incentive to play it because it's kind of
it was making a lot of safe choices.
Yeah.
To
try to be like a little bit like Super Turbo, it seemed like, because they focus a little bit more on, I guess, the ground game and ranging, because like Street Fighter 4 was more about it kind of had that, I forget what it was, but it was not like a parry, but you can absorb hits and things like that, so it kind of treated it as a parry. So ranging was still there, but not
focus attack.
Yeah, focus attack. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, my mind's a little fuzzy right now, but
no worries.
Yeah, but that game was fun, definitely fun. But a lot of people felt like it was too much of a change back to Street Fighter V. Like it seemed a little bit more rudimentary. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It wasn't as it didn't have as many options that Street Fighter 4 had, but I think that improved over time as well. So
yeah. I think that's the thing that I've heard about like this last year of DLC overall, is that some of the characters that they brought back have been a hell of a lot deeper in terms of their moveset.
Yeah.
Making for much more interesting play mechanics with them. Like Rose and Dan are apparently great examples of that.
Yeah.
And so I think I think they're actually in a pretty good place as far as trying to approach the new game, having had this year of making DLC and taking some experiments with a game that, fundamentally, like, no one's jumping on board the Street Fighter V wagon now
Yeah.
that hasn't already been there. But I think if they can, I think they've managed to make it interesting to this point in a way that some people are like, well, hey, maybe these new people, given the departure at Capcom,
Yeah.
Maybe these new people sort
Yeah.
of have a better grip on it and are going to be able to bring some fresh flavor to the new game.
You're talking about the new producer and other staff that kind of got recently promoted, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
The young blood. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what this series kind of needs, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think now you have esports, now you have online being very important nowadays. So
Right.
things like rollback, netcode,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, people want that. And
Right.
having better lobbies, better matchmaking. You got to get with the times in order to have a successful fighting game nowadays. It's not just bringing out a great game
Yeah.
that can get ruined if the experience online is not fun. So I think
Well,
that's
that was the
why.
thing. I think when SF5 began, they kind of started out with like, it didn't have the best network support,
Yep.
but it was so overwhelmingly geared towards esports and online play
Yeah.
that depending on what kind of a player you were, unless you were solely focused on making that sort of online play thing work for you on a regular basis,
Yeah.
there just wasn't a lot there. There wasn't a lot there for the old time heads. The network support on it was on kind of shaky ground to begin with. So,
Yeah.
hopefully after all this time and everything else that they created for that game,
Mm-hmm.
the staff that's working on it now just have a grip on it and are like, okay, these are the mistakes we're not going to make with the new game.
Yeah. And that's why I'm
So,
excited about Street Fighter 6 whenever that comes out. Because I think I'm sure most of them, if not all of them, were there when they saw what happened with Street Fighter 5 in the beginning. Yeah, so
right.
definitely I'd like to see what kind of new takes they have and what kind of new risks they would try to do in order
Right.
to uh, kind of get back to the top of the mountain if they're not already there. Because, now that Tekken 7 is out, it seems like Tekken and Smash, they seem to be a lot more popular now. So Capcom definitely
Right.
has some competition. And being the grandfather of all fighting games, you don't want to just lay down. You want to
Mm-hmm.
rise up
Right.
and get back into it. You know what I mean? So I hope
Exactly.
so, because we
Yeah.
both love Street Fighter. That's
Oh, yeah.
how pretty much how we met, if anything.
Right.
And I hope that this new generation of Street Fighter, when it comes out eventually, will bring new fans and appease the old players alike, and just kind of revitalize the franchise even more. That's what I'm hoping. So
For sure.
but yeah, one last thing though is that we really need Street Fighter 6 if it's possible in the arcades here in Japan, because let me tell you something. I mean, it was already a downhill slide with the arcades here in Japan because of, uh people slowly shifting towards console gaming or mobile gaming, but COVID made it even worse. And
Right.
now you see a lot of these arcades in Japan closing down here and there. And it's really scary because some of these arcades have been there for like 20, 30 years, and they were like a fixture of certain areas, especially in Tokyo. And now you hear, oh my God, this arcade's closing and this arcade's closing. And I see it firsthand when I go to my arcades, my game centers in Osaka. I live near Denden Town, which is like, if you think of Akihabara in Tokyo,
It's
it's pretty
Osaka's
much,
version of it.
yeah, yeah. And basically, when I go to the game centers, I see that it's kind of getting stagnant with the fighting game.
Mm-hmm.
the fighting games there. I mean, Guilty Gear Strive finally came out for arcade, but you don't see people jam packed into arcades like back when Street Fighter 4 came out.
Mm-hmm.
I was there when, and you were kind of there too when there were location tests and everything. And I remember how many people were there
Right.
when Street Fighter 4 was the hot ticket. And it was like that for several years. But now it's like with COVID and, geez, with the restrictions that the Japanese government had to do because of state of emergencies, because of COVID, it's been really hard for arcade operators to stay in business, and they need something like a new Street Fighter to hopefully keep them going once COVID is, you know, a little bit more in control. Because I honestly think if there's no new hit, I mean, right now all we have are music games and maybe a few big box games where it's impossible to have at home. But
Right.
yeah, you want something to bring the people in. And even
Yeah.
though you can play Street Fighter at home, if you can play in the arcade, that's another option. Like I told you,
Right.
some people
Well,
want
I
to
think
play.
following up with that,
Yeah.
there are some other hopes. I mean, KOF 15 is going to have a lot of interest, has been generating a lot of interest
Yep.
with the long stream of trailers that have been dropping for the last
I'm definitely excited.
many, many, many months, and it looks really, really good. I mean, it feels, you know, for a long time, 3D versions of SNK games were not great.
Yeah.
Like they just seem to really lack that sort of aesthetic flourish that SNK was known for with the titles that they produced for the Neo Geo.
Yeah.
And so it took a really long time for them to sort of figure out, okay, like this is actually how those games should look. This is much more in tune with the classic aesthetic. Samurai Showdown was like a huge leap forward for them in
I
my
agree.
mind in terms of capturing what made those games beautiful on the Neo Geo and really, really nailed down the spirit of those older games. And when I look at KOF 15, I mean, visually to me, like I see the color palette from the Real Bout games. I mean, it's really bright and
Yeah.
vivid and driven by primary colors and the sort of cell shaded nature of the textures. I mean, those are really good looking character models
Yeah.
that are
They
definitely a cut above what we'd seen from them previously.
It's interesting you bring up the color palette. I kind of saw that. I couldn't put it into words, but yeah, when the previous King of Fighters came out, it looked kind of, how should I say it? The colors looked a little bit faded
Mm-hmm.
and kind of looked kind of flat. Just
Yeah.
not. I don't know if it was like, especially the first one. Do you remember the first one? Oh my god,
Right.
it looked like something that was straight out of PlayStation 2.
Right.
And then they slowly got better with it, but you know,
So you're talking about KOF 14 and
yeah,
like the differences where they actually had like a huge patch that
yeah,
was specifically to like give all the characters kind of an aesthetic makeover.
yeah, and it
Um,
helped a little, I think.
yeah,
So, but
but yeah, KOF 15 is going to come out, and now that this Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown is out for PlayStation 4 and exists as a PlayStation Plus download,
yeah,
um, there are some sincere hopes that Sega might push forward and produce a new game based on whatever their metrics are for VF5 US being successful.
oh,
There's
and
also an online poll for that
yeah,
where you can sound off on how you feel about Virtua Fighter 5 US. I really enjoy the remake.
Yeah, I haven't
Um,
played it yet. It is in arcades, but I
mm,
haven't personally played it yet. But it looks fantastic.
yeah, I
Definitely.
mean the makeover with the modern day Yakuza Dragon engine, it's beautiful. And but at the same time, the remake completely preserves the gameplay as it existed in the last iteration of VF5.
And that's good.
Um,
That's great
and
to see. It was a nice surprise for all of us, I think.
yeah, so there's some hope on the horizon for the arcade scene and fighting games in general.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but a little closer to home right now, let's talk about what we're playing right now. So, what are you playing right now, Ed?
a mixture of things. Like I dabbled a little bit with part-time UFO, which is I don't know if you know this game, but if you know Kirby, uh HAL Laboratory, they made this game that is basically, if you think about it, it's like a UFO catcher game, a crane
Mm-hmm.
game, but you control this little UFO, and then it's one of those games where it gives you like tasks, and it
Mm-hmm.
tells you, oh, put the toys in the box, or arrange this uh group of items into a tower, things like that. But it's very satisfying, very fun. And if you're a completionist like me, where you have to get all the medals or the best score, then this is for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I highly recommend it. I've
Nice.
been playing that a
And
little
what's
bit.
that playable on?
I believe it's on Switch, Nintendo Switch.
Okay. Okay.
And the second one is Streets of Rage 4. I started playing
Yeah.
that again
Yeah.
because I'll be honest with you, when I first played it, when it first came out, I was not too keen on it because,
Okay.
and
But
I'll
go
tell you
into that a
why. I'll
little
tell
bit.
you why.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because when I started playing it, I noticed that the enemies had a little bit of, too much of an advantage sometimes when you were
Okay.
fighting with other uh opponents, and then like the walk speed for certain characters were way too fast, and I felt like, man, this is kind of frustrating because I mean, I played a lot of Streets of Rage 2, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the enemies reacting that way, where it kind of feels to the point where it's like your hero is
Mm-hmm.
not so super compared to the grunts, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So that's why
Yeah.
I kind of put it down for a little bit. But then
Mm-hmm.
when I heard about the DLC, was it Mr. X's Nightmare?
Mm-hmm.
I decided, all right, I'll try it again, because
Yeah.
you also told me about it, and you were telling me you've been loving it ever since day one, and I was like, all right, it's time to give it another chance, and I'm glad
Right.
I did, because
Mm-hmm.
now I don't know what they did since the first day or first month the game
Mm-hmm.
came out, but when I played it, it feels a lot more fair.
Okay.
It definitely feels better. It feels like, okay, if the enemies hit me, it's my fault. It's more in my control now.
Okay.
And also, I think I told you before, I played a beta of it at Bit Summit a
Right.
year or two before the game was released. And then
Right.
when I was playing it, in the short amount of time I could play it, I was playing Blaze. And then I was noticing that the game looks great, but I feel like I'm quite limited into what I can do in the game in terms of
Mm-hmm.
offense and things like that. Because
Yeah.
if you know me, I love the Double Dragon series, and my favorite
Mm-hmm.
game is Double Dragon Advance,
Right.
and that's on Game Boy Advance. And if you ever get to try this game, which is, one of those rare games that costs a lot of money now, but
Yeah.
um this game has tons of options in terms of offense and a little
Right.
bit of defense as well. When I played Streets of Rage 4, I felt like I kind of wish there was more I can do with my favorite character, which is Blaze. And then that
Mm-hmm.
was another reason why I was a little bit frustrated. But then when I started playing again, uh as recently as what, a week or two ago. Yeah,
Hmm.
I noticed the huge difference between like, okay, you can combo into this, and it feels very fluid now, and it's kind of they kind of up the combo system and allowing you to hit more.
Okay.
Which, yeah, I felt like in the beginning it was a little bit restricted, but now it's like they're letting the floodgates open, so now you can kind of like make your own combos, which I love. I love
Right.
making my own combos. I love, trying to lab up on that, go to
Hmm.
the laboratory and just, hey, what if I do this? And it even has its own training mode. And I love
Hmm.
that. So, yeah.
No, I. It's funny because like I continued to play Streets of Rage 4, and then I distinctively remember like you didn't talk about it much at all anymore. And
Yeah.
like I noticed that, but I didn't really like put it together. I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
because I was just absolutely smitten with the game.
Yeah.
You know, as somebody that purchased Bare Knuckle for Mega Drive as an
Yeah.
import and like waited for the UPS truck just based on like what a giant fan I was of Revenge of Shinobi
Mm-hmm.
and the coverage it had gotten in EGM. I was just absolutely sprung for that game.
Yeah.
And in that game, I used to play Adam more than Axel or Blaze.
Yeah.
So with Streets of Rage 4 bringing Adam back, I was just like completely sold.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I've continued to play it. I'm unbelievably happy with the DLC. I mean, I think it's really like a ridiculously good deal that for $8 you get 4 new characters, a boatload of new moves, this really interesting kind of quasi RPG light survival mode, and then
Yeah.
46 new minutes of music.
Yeah. And
So
definitely the survival mode. I tried that last night. It was so much fun.
yeah,
It's just you get a different power up every round you beat, and then there's hazards everywhere, and it makes it very, very interesting. And
yeah.
then random enemies, things like that. And well, I don't know about you, but I think my first couple games I lasted about 30 minutes. So
Hmm.
yeah, and that's pretty fun.
No, it's injected like a ton of additional life into an already really good game. So like
Yeah.
I purchased the first game digitally, then I landed a physical copy for Switch,
Mm-hmm.
and now with this one, even though I purchased the DLC digitally, apparently they are going to produce like a full like game of the year version physically that'll include the DLC. So I'll have
Yeah.
to pick that up as well, just because I appreciate the hell out of this game.
Do you remember who's doing it? Limited Games, or who is it? The one
I
that
don't think it's been announced
Limited Run?
yet. Like I saw some mock-up artwork somewhere,
Yeah.
and I should have taken more specific note of it, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Um, but
But
no, that'll be awesome to see when it drops.
yeah.
A thing I started playing this week, the Ascent came out on Xbox. I am playing it on the Xbox Series X.
Mm-hmm.
It's a. I don't want to call it a twin stick shooter because I heard it called that initially, and it's actually really not. It doesn't really play anything like Nex Machina or Geometry Wars or any of those twin stick shooters. If anything,
Yeah.
it's actually a little more Diablo-ish in that
Oh.
it's this cyberpunk flavored shooter.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. It just nails that whole Blade Runner aesthetic perfectly, with just a boatload of fancy next gen visual effects in tow.
Hmm.
There's kind of like I don't think it's actually employing ray tracing in the game, but it's employing ray tracing like lighting and effects.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's fun. It does. I was talking about this with our mutual friend Mike, and he observed that it starts out a little bit slow, but then it really generates like a big old head of steam. Last night was the first time that I sat down and plunked a couple hours into it,
Yeah.
and it's pretty cool. Like it's not. There's a lot of people who are just like flipping out and raving about it. I'm not quite there yet. I need to see a little bit more how it sort of develops, and like the combat itself takes a little bit of getting used to, because like it really does feel more like Diablo than it does like a twin stick shooter. In that when
So
the
how?
enemies approach, it's like when the
Yeah.
enemies approach within a certain range, like you pull the L trigger to sort of activate like this laser scope kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then like if you're using a machine gun, the gun will sort of spray and kind of auto track enemies like within a certain range.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit sort of floatier than I would have imagined, but it's still pretty darn cool. And, you know, it's really about just sort of like using your dodge roll to get the hell out of the way, because the enemies will frequently just try to bum rush you. And so you want to backtrack a little bit, roll back, and then fire back in their general direction.
So it has the Cabal roll, right? From the
Yeah, kind of.
arcade
It's
game
kind of
Cabal.
like the shock troopers thing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And also Wild Guns also has that as well. So that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't
like
have
when
an
Xbox. When we used to call you Roll Boy.
Dude, all you do is roll. That's all you do, dude.
That's all you do.
That's all you do.
Every once in a while, Eddie and I will make reference to this dude named Jeff. Hey,
yes, Jeff.
You're out there.
You're amazing. He is the quote machine, because anything he says is quotable because of the way he talks. But we love him.
Very, very declarative. There was a time, this is when the first Capcom versus SNK appeared.
Yes.
And Eddie would rock a team of nothing but ratio ones, including King, who had this thoroughly obnoxious, like, third of the screen roll.
Yep.
And Jeff would get really frustrated with this.
He gets frustrated easily when it comes to fighting games. He'll say stuff to you, like, if he doesn't like the way you play, he'll start making fun of you, or start
a running commentary.
Yeah. So yeah, I was known as Roll Boy.
Yep.
Because that's all you do is roll. Dude, it makes me want to quit this game, dude. If that's all you're gonna do, dude, I don't want to play anymore, dude. It's just not fun.
Jeff was clearly not a KOF player.
But I definitely was. Yes,
precisely.
Yep. That's why I knew. I just knew. But thank you for bringing those memories up. Thank you.
Oh yeah, classic. So our last item here is the big question, and this is a little bit of a weird one. And I feel like Eddie, for you, like your location is kind of the key to this. What other things have video games served as a portal to in your life?
Like a gateway drug, right?
Yeah, a gateway drug, or pointed you towards some other sort of cultural or personal interest, like whatever it is. It's a very open-ended question.
Well, there's one obvious one, and that's me being here in Japan, because of the influence of the video games that mostly came from here. You know, as I've mentioned a few times before, one of my favorite games is Street Fighter. And when I found out, oh my God, it's in Japan, then I started becoming a little bit more interested in the culture and trying to learn the language. And I definitely started drawing because of artists like Bangus, who drew amazing art for games like Vampire Hunter, which is also known as Darkstalkers. That was my favorite series back in the day. And I loved the way he drew the characters. So that got me interested into drawing a little bit of his style, because it was unique. You know, he had characters with big hulking hands and feet, and it wasn't proportional to normal people, but I was like, wow, this is so awesome just to see his style of art. Also, there was Kinu Nishimura, who is also she's still at Capcom from what I understand, or not at Capcom, but draws things for Capcom.
Mm-hmm.
And she has been drawing art for them since Super Turbo. So Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Artists like that got me into drawing on my own. And I still draw to this day, and I'm still learning. So that's
And it's
one.
really useful now in your trade as a teacher,
Oh
correct?
yeah, definitely. It helps me a lot with when I draw little things for the students to, I like to make a lot of jokes, and I use a lot of visual gags. So I've been known to draw a few funny pictures, things like that. And they're all video game related. So yeah, it's fun. But the biggest surprising gateway drug for me for video games was football, because I had no idea about football before I played a game called Tecmo Bowl, which any classic NES gamer would know.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend, I had a friend, and he was playing football in high school back in the day. And then I would visit his house once in a while to play NES games. And then one of his favorite games was Tecmo Bowl, and I
Mm-hmm.
was watching him play. And then I was watching him play, I believe, as the 49ers. And then I was looking at the time, Joe Montana. And I was like, wow, this guy's pretty cool. Like, he's a excellent thrower of the football. You know what I mean? And he had
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Rice to throw to. And I started learning, wow, these are some really cool football players that just the game itself. Like, I started learning, like, these guys that I've heard from, the news, they're in this game. So I started playing a little bit at his house. And then before you know it, I bought Tecmo Super Bowl, started learning names of all these players. And before you know it, I pretty much know probably 80 to 90% of all the rosters out there in the current NFL. And even in past NFL seasons, I know so many previous players that have played the game just because I played Tecmo Bowl on NES. It kind of became an addiction. Just wow, football is really exciting to watch and to play on in video games. So that
Yeah.
was that was my huge gateway drug, besides the obvious, the link to Japan. Football was also very big for me. So
And
yeah.
while we're on this retro NFL tip, I just want to doff my cap real
Yeah.
briefly for the NFL 2K series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I miss that series. It was so
Uh
good.
huh.
I loved
You
it on
can't
Dreamcast.
you can't coach that,
You
Ed.
can't coach that. So good. Man, when Madden took over the NFL franchise, I was so sad
It was a
because
dark day.
yeah. But anyways, how about you? What was your gateway drug in terms of going through
You
video
know,
games?
it's tough to think of specifics because I'd been going to arcades in some form or another since I was like 5,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had consoles in my life pretty much since around that time moving forward. I think innately they appealed to me just because it's such an overwhelmingly visual art form,
Yeah, it
and
is.
I've always been drawn to those things. There's just this sort of indistinguishable haze between like me growing up and being a big Star Wars fan, and then when I got a little bit older and we were in like the dark ages of like the late 80s and early 90s when there was very little happening with Star Wars,
Yeah.
and I would read about like George Lucas's influences, that like, oh, this is why Darth Vader has a helmet that looks like that, because George Lucas was a huge fan of samurai films, and
Mm.
Ralph McQuarrie's concept art catered to that. at the same time, like my burgeoning interest in video games and what was happening with magazine coverage at the time, Super Mario 3 dropped, a year and a half ahead of when the US got it. And that
Yeah.
entire time, like, there were all these little snippets and teasers of that game appearing in video game magazines. And I just became absolutely fascinated with the idea that, like, there was this parallel world in Japan where they had all like the same consoles that we did, but they were getting all these games that we didn't have. And that became just like, oh, like, what are they getting to play that I don't get to? You know what I mean? And
Yeah, the frustration and
right.
also the language barrier.
Yeah, I mean, that was a time when I wasn't particularly adventurous about that kind of thing. I mean, I definitely wasn't like, I wasn't gonna bite on like a Japanese copy of like Phantasy Star 2 to play that sooner. Like I wasn't quite there yet, but I would deal with it with something like bare knuckle, no problem. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird, I don't know, like to me, like there's no sort of separating what my interests are culturally because they've all just sort of kind of bled into the same stream for so long that it's kind of tough to really pick how games became a portal into one thing. I think if anything, like that experience of going to arcades when I was young really sort of fostered like a really sort of independent streak to me where there's been a few different times in my adult life where like I've moved like sight unseen to take a job in another state. That might be the kind of thing that would sort of spook some people, but like when you're 13 and running around in an arcade by yourself with a pocket of quarters, I mean, it was all sort of like select your own adventure.
Yeah.
And so I think the spirit of that time still is something that resides within me. And, it always makes me sort of curious or, with a certain level of wanderlust. Like, hey, what's over there and what's happening there? And how do I experience whatever's going on in the place where I'm not, for better or worse.
Yeah, because originally, where did you grow up? It wasn't in the States, was it?
No, it was in Tucson mostly until I was about the age of 8, and that's when wound up moving to Guam for a little while. But split time
Yeah.
between Guam and San Diego.
Oh, okay. Because I remember you told me a while back that you went to Guam, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know too much about your days in Guam, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that maybe video games were.
Well, that was the thing is my interest in them even peaked further while I was over there because there were kids wandering around
Yeah.
that had Game and Watches,
Oh,
and I had
nice.
never seen those before. So seeing kids have those, I was just like, oh, what is this? Like the only comparable thing that I had seen before that, going to elementary school in San Diego, like there were a couple of kids that I knew that had like the Pac-Man watch.
Yeah, I had
And
that.
that was some pretty mind-blowing shit at that age.
Yep.
But then to see like this completely self-contained like dual screen thing, I mean the first one I saw was somebody's Donkey Kong Game and Watch, and I was just like, "Oh, what is this?" And it kind of blows my mind that like I was there right around the same time that like the Famicom landed in Japan,
Yeah.
but like I wouldn't quite get there yet. You know what I mean? And that was always sort of a thing that was like motivating me growing up. I was like, "Oh, I really want to go to Japan someday," because like I was really close at one point.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
but eventually you did.
I know,
Eventually
yeah,
made it.
yeah, exactly.
And I was here for that.
Yeah, and that was a damn good time
we had some
back in
great
2008. Oh yeah.
Yep. So,
So
but yeah, I think this question, the reason why I thought of it was because I don't know of many other hobbies that could be out there that if you do this hobby, there are so many things that can branch out from it that also can pique your interest and also be a huge part in your life as well. And
right.
yeah, for me, thanks to video games, I'm in Japan and I love football. I love sports. And
Yeah.
well, mentioning George Lucas I'm sorry, Steven Spielberg or George Lucas. I don't kill me for mixing these up, but um, Indiana Jones, I had no interest in until I played Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the arcade cabinet from Atari.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. What do you mean there's a movie for this?
Mm-hmm.
And then I watched the movie and I was like, wow, I love Indiana Jones. So
nice.
That's when I became a fan. So that's
right on.
Another example. There you go.
See, that's funny because that is the inverse. Like most people would have seen the movie first.
Yeah.
And then, maybe discovered the game at the mall arcade like after the movie.
Yeah. But for me, my window was right through video games. If it wasn't in video games, I had no idea what it was back then. So there you go.
Nice. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, obviously the single biggest takeaway from gaming is just like, between you and Mike and Sebastian and some of the other people I know, I mean,
yeah,
it's definitely been the gateway to like the longest lasting relationships that I've had my entire life that aren't people that I'm related to.
That too. Some of my lifelong friends, best friends, I met through video games.
Yep.
Almost all the time. So I'm very grateful for this hobby, and I'll continue it until the day I die.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Bury me with my consoles.
Yep. Bury me with my pocket consoles, my Neo Geo Pocket. Thank you.
I know. You've got all portables, so most of that shit's going to fit in there easier.
Yeah. For you, what would you put in your casket?
Yeah.
One thing.
Oh, this is I mean, is this like a separate question now? Like, what's the one piece of video game paraphernalia you'd be buried with?
You want to answer that now, or do you want to answer that?
This got dark. I don't know. Let's ponder that and save that for next time.
All right? Let's parking lot that one. All right, no problem. But
all right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 2 of Oh God, It Hurts.
Oh God, it hurts. Thank you so much.
Yeah. You can find Eddie at GameAgent ET on Instagram. You can find me at Super Mario Kart with a K on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Check out many of the other programs on the Ruminations Radio Network. There are many other great. Check out Retro Futurist Culture or Ruminations of Red Rum or many of the other awesome shows.
Yeah.
What's up, gang? This is Hoptimus. You've been listening to one of the great new podcasts from Ruminations Radio Network. If you want some more tasty sound vibes, come check out my new podcast, The Retro Futurist Culture, where we talk about alternate timelines, cyberpunk, anime, and other crazy worlds. If that does not strike your fancy, we have plenty of other great shows at ruminationsradionetwork.com.